Alright, I've made 3 videos in a row complaining about stuff that sucks for survivors. In order to stave off the entitled survivor main allegations, it's time to talk about something that sucks for killers right now. I mean, I say that like people aren't gonna throw around those allegations anyway like they always do, but screw it, I want to talk about this. The 9.1.0 update is one that came with a lot of controversy. There are so many things to unpack in this recent update that I'm thinking I probably should have just made one massive hour-long video complaining about a lot of the stuff here, but this way is a lot more fun in my opinion. Despite the numerous bugs that the update launched with, I want to ignore those for the time being to talk about some changes that have left me completely dumbfounded. More so than usual. I've already made a video talking about the clown changes, which I have big problems with, so check that out if you want to, because today we're not talking about the clown. We're instead talking about how behavior essentially killed one of the only defenses killers had against strong items, and how that change alone has probably single-handedly made the perk obsolete. A perk that was once fantastic for stomping out incredibly strong items to give killers a chance if they manage to get value from it. What perk am I talking about? Well, everyone's favorite anti-item rage bait perk, Franklin's Demise, and how it rose to power and in one flawless strike by behavior has become worthless again. Released with Leatherface in patch 1.7.0, Franklin's Demise was one of Bubba's 3 teachable perks that you could unlock by leveling him up, among Barbecue and Chili and Knockout. It wasn't great at first, as it only took 10% of an item's charges when dropped after hitting the survivor, and it didn't drain those charges over time either. It was essentially a gimmick perk that wasn't incredibly useful. It was okay for dealing with some items that could be used in chases, such as syringes or styptic agents, which were both even dumber back then than they are now, with styptics being capable of instantly healing one health state and syringes being capable of, and I quote, instantly and completely healing a survivor when used, which means a survivor would go from the dying state to healthy in the span of milliseconds if they had a teammate nearby with the add-on. Because that was fair by 2017 behavior standards. Like I've said many times, DBD was just a different game back then.
What I got a med kit.
Do I get this?
What? I just got auto-aimed through the wall! By hitting a survivor with the med kit which had those add-ons, you could prevent them from being used during that chase. However, the strength of the items at the time could also just leave Franklin's in the dust, as a survivor could get hit by you, instantly pick up the medkit, and probably use the syringe or styptic, healing before you could hit them a second time. So it really depended on the circumstances for whether or not you got value from the perk, and thanks to the laughable 10% penalty when used, when it came to bulkier items like toolboxes or medkits that were intended to be used fully, the perk mostly felt, how you say, ineffective. It was even changed a little after release to only work on basic attacks like it does now, so that didn't do anything to help the very niche use it had. This left Franklin's Demise as a pretty bad perk. It would do nothing to prevent the survivors from just finding their items again when they had the opportunity, and using them as if nothing happened. Considering how strong items were back then too, it was just a disappointing perk to use because it never felt super effective in that state. But don't worry, it would later have its time in the sun. In July of 2020, patch 4.1.0 dropped. This patch was focused around reworking both of our favorite, and only, Chainsaw Boys, Billy and Bubba, as well as giving some of their perks a tune-up, like Franklin's Demise, which was reworked to destroy items after they were left on the ground for 90 seconds. This made the perk a lot stronger, as there was actually a consequence for the survivors who were hit by it. Instead of just losing a measly 10% of their charges, if they didn't get back to it in time, the item would be completely gone, and there was nothing they could do about it. It also revealed the aura of the dropped items to the killer for some reason. That feature of it was only ever effective to see if the item was picked up, but due to the lack of a notification noise or even an indicator to the killer to let them know that, it would only ever come into effect if the killer was paying hard attention to the item, which would rarely happen unless it was like a key or something to actually be afraid of. It was just kind of a side benefit to the real good stuff, which was the item being destroyed after a bit of time. However, the perk still wasn't incredible. It was stronger, but if the survivors managed to get their item in time, it wouldn't really matter. It would feel as if nothing happened, which meant that the perk still wasn't amazing. It was okay, but it could be a lot better. Luckily for us though, behavior wasn't done with Franklin's Demise. Not yet. It was about 1 year later in June of 2021 when the 5.0.0 update dropped. This release, which also gave us the first Resident Evil chapter, happened to come with updates to some perks, and specifically Franklin's Demise again. When taking another look at the perk, behavior decided to rework it to slowly drain items of their charges whenever the perk was used by the killer, and only stop depleting the charges when the survivors picked the item back up. If they didn't, the item would be fully drained after 90 seconds, instead of just being deleted without removing the charges, like the first first rework changed it to do. This second rework alone single-handedly made the perk a lot better to use. It fixed the issue the original version of the perk had, where it wouldn't do much to bulkier items that had a lot of charges, and fixed the issue the first rework had where survivors could pick up the item before it was destroyed to no consequence. Thanks to the rework it got, the perk was capable of fully draining some really strong items, or at least depleting them enough that survivors wouldn't get nearly as much out of them as they could have. This was insanely useful when it came to teams who were all bringing medkits or toolboxes, as those items, especially back then, could break the game with how strong they were. Franklin's Demise was about the only decent defense that killers had against those playstyles. Nothing else could deal with items as well as Franklin's did. What else are you gonna run? Overwhelming presence? Yeah, okay. It was essentially the Lightborn to every other item besides flashlights. You know, you see a team with all flashlights, you run Lightborn to basically remove their items from the gameplay, assuming you care that much about flashlights. Trust me, I love doing that just to upset people who bring a ton of flashlights into the game. It's hilarious. When you saw a team with all medkits or toolboxes, you ran Franklin's, except Franklin's could come in handy no matter what items the survivors brought. The only real downsides to the perk was that it was very situational on whether or not you should run it, and it works much better on some killers than others. Typically killers whose power leave them with having to hit a lot of basic attacks most of the time. Killers like Trapper, Wraith, Hag especially, Ghostface, Myers, and a bunch of other killers could get a lot of value out of it, but again, it did depend on what the survivors were bringing. The upside to this is that you could usually tell before a match even started whether or not the survivors were bringing shit, which you could play around if you were worried about the items they were bringing by quickly throwing on Franklin's before the actual match started. It wasn't a perk you would consistently use on a killer like every single match, but it could be a game changer if you decided to run it after seeing a lobby with a bunch of items. By the way, this was also way before medkits got that massive rework to prevent them from being used exclusively for self-healing and instead focusing on altruistic actions. This would mean that if a survivor or multiple survivors brought a green medkit with some cracked add-ons, you could prevent them from getting to use them by making them drop it with the basic attack and hooking the same survivor soon after. Unless they were immediately unhooked, by the time they got back to the medkit, it might have lost enough charges that the survivor could no longer use it as they intended to, which was great because medkits were stupid. And still kind of are. It could also completely prevent players from popping styptics or syringes if it was fully depleted, as you can't use those add-ons, or any add-ons if the item in question has no charges left. It was less strong when it came to toolboxes, as people that bring toolboxes will most likely instantly use them the second they load into the match and find a generator. If they didn't though, or you interrupt them before they could fully use it, you could severely limit the value they get out of the toolboxes. It could also, stop brand new parts potentially, which will always be peak. Look, whatever dumb item-related problems you can think of, Franklin's Demise was great at dealing with them. It was pretty solid when it came to dealing with multiple item-related playstyles, which can be pretty common when going against a Swift team who can all coordinate their item usage. And it stayed that way for a decent amount of time. Again, it was still a niche perk for the most part, but when it came to dealing with any items that could be brought into the game, there was nothing better to bring perk-wise. Sure, some specific killers have add-ons to counter them, but the large majority of the killer roster doesn't. Having a perk like this was necessary because it could prevent some real annoying things from happening, especially since items could be incredibly strong when paired with the right build. After Franklin's second rework, not only were we already dealing with things like built to last, streetwise, or just chest-related builds in general, but things were also being added that could make items a lot stronger. For a very recent example, botany knowledge getting buffed to no longer affect a healing item's efficiency, making medkits a whole lot stronger, which kind of offset the nerf they got to make it less appealing for self-healing actions. For another example, built to last being buffed a bit after Franklin's rework, allowing you to bring a strong item and fully recharge it once, and continuing to recharge it, albeit by less and less each time. Considering how much easier it was to get strong items due to the numerous changes to the blood web and many events and game modes that allowed you to get huge sums of blood points, this perk was seeing more and more use. Was it ever super popular? Not really, but it definitely had its fans. Franklin's Demise being a pretty decently popular perk out of the 120 plus killer perks in the game speaks for itself, I think. It was a decent perk that was satisfying to use and effective in some niche, but not super uncommon scenarios. At least, it was. With patch 9.1.0, behavior essentially told Franklin's Demise to look at the flowers as they shot it in the back of the head. That is to say, Franklin's got a huge nerf. It now no longer drains items over time. Yeah, you heard me right. It no longer drains items over time. Instead, all it does is reveal items on the ground after the killer hits a survivor with the basic attack. So Franklin's is essentially weaker than it was when it came out. At least the release version of Franklin's took 10% of an item's charges. Current Franklin's does nothing but show you the items on the ground, which again, as I talked about before, doesn't really do anything unless you're worried about a specific item, and now that it doesn't drain or delete the item over time, like it did for either rework, there is literally no consequence for survivors getting hit by this perk, other than the obvious they need to pick up the item again and can't use it in chase, like the perk has always done from just a conceptual standpoint, at least in most chases. Sometimes the survivor will stay injured just to bait you into chasing them after they pick up their items so they can use their styptic or syringe, whatever, against you, but that's always been the case. Interestingly enough, Built to Last, Streetwise, and Appraisal all had changes in this update too, with Built to Last straight up getting buffed, Streetwise now giving items found in chests a bonus of 80% charges, and Appraisal being able to be used on the same chest multiple times with an additional token to be used. This is not a coincidence. Behavior clearly wants players to start interacting with chests more, which is fine. If anything, I think it's a good thing that they're trying to turn chests into a beneficial side objective for the survivors to do, but did we really need to nerf Franklin's for that? Sure, medkits aren't as strong as they used to be, keys can't open the hatch the same way they used to, toolboxes are... Okay, toolboxes are basically the same, but that doesn't change the fact that you can still make items incredibly strong with the right setups. For example, you can bring a medkit with gel dressings and the gauze roll add-ons, pair it with botany to get 2 decently fast heals on yourself, and then pair it with Built to Last and upgrade those 2 heals into 5 heals. That's insanely strong. But Skrump, if you have to bring a medkit, add-ons, and 2 perks to do that, who cares? I do. Certain random internet person who I'm assuming is making this argument right now. It doesn't matter if the survivor has to commit a certain playstyle to do this, it's really strong. An item with some add-ons as well as half a build dedicated to getting the most use out of it is not a crazy sacrifice to make for consistently being able to heal yourself. I promise, in most games that's more heals than you'll ever need. For some other medkit examples, using both the skill check add-ons is insanely strong. Syringes are still really good even when not used in chases, and you can use the perk Pharmacy and buff Streetwise to give yourself some insanely bulky medkits, which can again be recharged with Built to Last. The same goes for bringing a Commodious toolbox with charge add-ons, or bringing a key with Blood Amber and Braided Bubble. All of these things are incredibly strong, but at least back a little bit ago, you could bring Franklin's if you were really worried about that. Now, Franklin's doesn't do anything. Sure, it knocks items out of players' hands, but we need to ask ourselves what that's really doing. If a survivor wants to get their item back, they will, and now they have all the time in the world to do it. Getting hit with Franklin's almost has no consequence besides the superficial, and I don't understand why this choice to nerf Franklin's was made right now. There are multiple ways to recharge an item or find an even better one in chests, and removing the only defense that killers had against that just baffles me. It was nice that they buffed the range of the aura reading, but who in their right mind is going to take a perk that has no benefit beyond that? Maybe if the perk gave some sort of notification to the killer that it was picked up, or had some kind of penalty to the survivor if they interacted with their item again, I could see this change to Franklin's making sense, but right now it kind of feels gross. It seems like they want items to be a bigger part of the game, which again is fine, but why are we penalizing killers for that? If items had much less bullshit going on in terms of combinations with add-ons or builds, I would have less of a problem with this, but due to how strong items still are, it takes away what killers could do against that gameplay. Regardless, Franklin's isn't going to last much longer in the public eye. It's a niche perk that had its best feature nuked overnight for seemingly no reason, and now does little to do what it was designed to, which was to counter items. Taking Franklin's was already a gamble due to how the perk works. Survivors might not be bringing the strong shit you think they are, and now you've wasted a perk slot on something you didn't need. That was always the risk, and now the perk might as well join Septic Touch in terms of perks that no one uses. Maybe people will still keep using Franklin's, but I certainly won't. In terms of going against survivor items now, there's just not a lot to bring to the match. They nerfed the one thing that was really good at dealing with them, which really sucks. But what do you guys think about the Franklin's nerf? Do you think it makes sense? Do you hate it like I do? Do you think it was meant to punish people for bringing Weave attunement? Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.